One more. Boom. I'm gonna take this guy off. Thank you so much. Whoa, hey. Hello, everyone. Good morning. Thank you so much, David. Thank you, Julie, Mackenzie, Jeff, Gina, Chris. Everyone I've met with the Creative Mornings team this morning has made this an unbelievably smooth and cozy morning. Really excited to be here. Really excited to share the space with As We Are. If you guys don't follow As We Are and Matt on Instagram, you should. Matt's Halloween costume was one of the best things I've ever seen. It was a miniature version of As We Are as like a hat, a helmet. It was amazing. Really, really cool. So I'm excited to be here this morning. Thank you guys for having me. Thank you guys for coming early to come listen to me. My talk is on anxiety. I lobbied hard to speak for genius, but Wolf beat me to that. But I'm happy to be here and talk about anxiety. Hot mic. So I want to start with a show of hands. Who here has felt anxiety in the last week? Felt anxious? How about the last 24 hours? I feel it. Anxiety is such a human, common emotion that we all feel and sort of rarely talk about. As David said, my name is Jay. I'm a writer and community builder. Created a community called Unreal Collective, where I help people start projects and businesses. I'm all about action. I help people get started, and I help people get things done. And so I work with a lot of people who look to me to be sort of confident and leading and guiding and sure of myself. And so I often hide my own anxiety, but it's there. I think everybody feels it, and it should be okay to talk about. And so right here, I want to put a big fat disclaimer to say everything in this presentation is told through the lens of my own experience with anxiety. I'm not going to pretend to know what your experience with anxiety is like. There's no way for me to calibrate my own experience with yours. I hope that this is useful and helpful to you and you can resonate with some of this. But obviously, I don't know your experience, but I would like to empathize with it. But in my experience, I've found that I can take my anxiety and in some ways reframe it to actually turn what can be a total impediment into something productive at times. And so I want to talk to you about how you can take some steps to actually weaponize and sort of leverage anxious energy, or at least how I've been able to do it. So I've got two sort of ways that I experience anxiety, and maybe these resonate with you. One is just sort of this frenetic state of mania, this like excited energy that I feel, which I'll talk about here in a moment. And the other is a heavier feeling, didn't show up here, a heavier feeling of sort of worry and fear and stress. And that's a lot more insidious and sort of harder to deal with. This may be something that you relate to a little bit more. But first, I'll start with this kind of state of mania. Have anyone here heard of the Ballmer Peak? A couple people. Steve Ballmer, former CEO of Microsoft. This comic kind of brought Ballmer Peak to the forefront from this comic called XKCD. And it's this idea that for computer programmers, there's this very specific level of blood alcohol concentration where your programming skill goes way up. But if you overshoot it, it actually becomes a huge detriment. And the comic kind of jokes that this happened and Microsoft ME happened, or Windows ME happened. And so I find that I have a similar Ballmer Peak in my sort of frenetic, anxious energy, but it's not blood alcohol concentration, it's actually caffeine. a mixture of caffeine and deadlines can put me into this hyper-productive space, but it's super tricky because if I overshoot it, then you just kind of end up being in a fetal position in your bed for a couple hours thinking, what am I doing? I can't get anything done. But I want to talk more about this second anxious experience, which I think is more common, this sort of heavy state of stress and worry and fear. Being a creative professional, you've signed up to have a literal daily battle, and that battle, your enemy, is with something called the resistance. And I'm going to refer to that resistance as this tornado emoji for the rest of the presentation. And this comes from a book by Steven Pressfield called The War of Art, which I highly, highly recommend picking up and reading. Even though I'm going to cover a lot of what is in that book in this presentation, it's one of the most validating, comforting, easy reads I've ever come across. And as a creative professional, I think this should be required reading. And I think you'll, quite frankly, love it. So this is the first definition of resistance that Steven Pressfield gives in this book. He says, resistance cannot be seen, touched, heard, or smelled, but it can be felt. We experience it as an energy field radiating from a work in potential. It's a repelling force. It's negative. Its aim is to shove us away, distract us, prevent us from doing our work. Show of hands, who had a hard time getting out of bed this morning to come here at 8:30? It's okay, I won't feel offended. Who here was up last night and for a couple of hours you're thinking, if I could just get this one more thing done, I could go to bed? Also me. That is the resistance. That is exactly some of the hallmark of feeling the resistance. Some definitions that Steve gave in this book. The resistance is invisible. The resistance is internal. The resistance is insidious. The resistance is infallible. The resistance is universal. The resistance never sleeps. One that didn't come on here. The resistance plays for keeps. So some of the greatest hits of the resistance, that these are things that if you try to take them on, you're going to feel this. So if you've tried to do any of these things, then you know what the resistance is. Oh no, it didn't show up. Here's one. Any act of political, moral, or ethical courage, including the decision to change for the better from some unworthy pattern of misbehavior. Any act that entails commitment of the heart, the decision to get married, to have a child, to weather a rocky patch in a relationship. But if you learn to recognize the resistance, you can use that. You can say, hello, I see you, resistance, and you can dance with that. You can dance with this feeling of the resistance, because you never overcome it. You can't overcome it. The best you can do is greet it as an old friend and say, hello again, I'm glad you're here. Let's try to coexist and not destroy each other. Because the resistance is rooted in anxiety. It's there because you care. It's there because you have high expectations of yourself. And one of the best quotes, talks, explanations I've ever heard of this is from Ira Glass, which you may have heard before, and I think is worth repeating because I never get tired of hearing this. And he says, nobody tells this to people who are beginners. I wish someone had told me. All of us who do creative work, we get into it because we have good taste. But there's this gap. For the first couple of years you make stuff, it's just not that good. It's trying to be good, it has potential to be good, but it's not. But your taste, the thing that got you into the game, is still killer. And your taste is why your work disappoints you. A lot of people never get past this phase. They quit. Most people I know who do interesting, creative work went through years of this. We know our work doesn't have the special thing that we want it to have, and we all go through this. And if you're starting out or you're still in this phase, you've got to know that it's normal, and you got to know that the best thing you can do is put yourself on a deadline so that every week you'll finish one story. It is only by going through a volume of work that you'll close that gap, and your work will be as good as your ambitions. And I took longer to figure this out than anyone I've ever met. It's going to take a while. It's normal to take a while. You just got to fight your way through. So I absolutely love that. And what he's talking to is that when you recognize resistance, you can use that as a signal, a good signal for you. because that resistant lives in our brain. Actually, a small part of our brain, the amygdala, right there. And the amygdala is this tiny piece of our brain that we share with all animals. And we evolved, and we've created this entire big brain around it, but we're still really impacted by this small part that just cares about a few things, like shelter, and safety, and sex, and revenge. And it gives us this constant signal of fear. That's our amygdala. And Seth Godin, who's a personal hero of mine, he refers to this as the lizard brain, this small part of our brain that we share with reptiles and small things that we don't consider to be as intelligent as we are. And so, this is the favorite emoji I've ever made. It's an emoji on top of an emoji. The lizard brain can be used as a compass. It can be used to guide you in a good direction. Because when you feel fear, that's a signal of risk. And that risk in creative work is usually opportunity. It's usually telling you, hey, I'm afraid of this because it may not work. I'm afraid of this because people aren't doing this, because people may not like this. And that's a signal that you're onto something. That's a signal that you should press through, and you should do that. You should say, this is great. I see this resistance. I recognize it's coming from my lizard brain, and it's pointing me in the direction that I need to go. And you can start to say, if I don't feel that resistance, if I don't feel this fear around the work that I'm putting out there, you can think, why isn't this scary? Is this not risky enough? Am I not doing the best that I can do? What would this look like to make me feel a little bit of fear? And then, if you're using that as your compass, you can dance with that resistance. And boom, you'll find your best work. Thank you.